Hi, Joe. Bob Naversky with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Thank you very much for your comments. I just wanted to make a comment or two and then pose a question to you. The NRCS and IPM working group for a few years has been working on trying to develop an Ipm Credential, which could help implement and increase the adoption of IPM in specialty crops and other areas. And I was just curious, what are your thoughts about perhaps developing an HRM credential, or even thinking a little more broadly? Resistance is pervasive not only in weeds, but also in other pests like arthropods and plant pathogens and nematodes and other things. So maybe one could have a pesticide resistance credential that would certify somebody that they have a broad breadth of knowledge dealing with issues that most crop advisors have to deal with anyway. So that's just a thought. And then my second comment would be, or question, is you mentioned the importance of having a consistent message. And I'm just curious how consistent the message may be between the certified advisors and retailers versus what's coming out of the extension folks.
That's a good question. I think I don't know if anybody has an answer to that question. Does anybody in the audience have any information on the consistency of messages between those two groups?
That might be necessary to explore to get us all on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes.
My question plays a little bit on the one that Phil Westra asked. You were emphasizing science-based should the information be that is used and that the advisor should use. Science needs research, research needs funding. Isn't it also very important to educate the funding agencies and the decision makers for these funding agencies what the situation is in terms of wheat research or wheat science research, and how much of a problem that is and how much science we need to address that problem? Because I think besides USDA and AFRI programs that have been mentioned before, there's not a whole lot of obvious funding sources around.
That's a good point. I think that we have our job cut out for us in that area as well. I think we need to educate as many people as possible. Anybody else? Ah, good. Steve always has an opinion.
Jill, one of the most powerful things that we have found is that farmers talking to farmers, so we have what we call resistance champions. They are outstanding farmers who we give training in communication skills and pay them, and that we have found is by far the most effective means, because farmers respect other good farmers and farmers listen very carefully to other good farmers.
Your point is well taken. That's why I put growers as the first group in terms of the educators. I agree with you. And I think that we can learn from the examples that have been successful in Australia or in Southland, excuse me, to learn how we can do some things differently here.
Hey, Jill. Carol Mosley with Syngenta. And Steve, thanks for setting up my question, but I got a couple of comments first.
Good.
You know, my thoughts going back to David Shaw's original slide this morning about insanity and Einstein, and I got to thinking about that, and I was walking around the building today looking at lunchtime, looking for a statue of Bill Murray because I felt like I was in Groundhog Day. and the reason I say that is, you know, we saw this in the 80s. We saw it, you know, we revisited again in the 90s and the 2000s. And when I hit my alarm clock this morning and turned it off, just like Bill Murray used to do in Groundhog Day, I was thinking, you know, we're thinking about herbicide resistance management again. And we're kind of doing some of the recycle here. But I will have to say, you know, ultimately we're going to have to make it socially unacceptable to have herbicide-resistant weeds. Somehow we're going to have to get to that point. And I will acknowledge, too, that we have to think about what's different. What is different now than what it was when we had this summit a couple of years ago and when we started talking about resistance many, many years ago back in the 70s. And I think part of it is we don't have the next mechanism of action. I think everybody knows that. We see some of the writings on the wall as it relates to that, so that's a challenge. So, we also realize, I think, that it's a behavior issue. We've got to do, we got to get more grower involvement here, but we have to make things change, and we'll have to figure out from a sociological standpoint, how do we make those change? And I hate to admit it, but I do agree with Mike Owen. We do have to push this from the grower level up, and I think that's where a lot of it's going to start. I think they've seen that in Australia, Steve. And my question to you is, what can we do to collaborate more with grower groups as we move forward as it relates to these resistant management issues?
Well, you're moving into my opinion here. I think that one of the things that we suffer from is everybody trying to carve out their own territory in terms of, we've got the answers, we will provide the solutions, and we don't have to work with anybody else. And I think that we have to break down some of those barriers and really look at how do we work more effectively with each other and really sit down in the room together. First, I think that one of the things that we talked about is communication and how important that is. We have to go out and we have to listen to the growers and engage the growers so that we can hear what they're saying and let them make sure that they're part of the process instead of just trying to talk at them. We need to listen to them more carefully. And I think we need to do the same between some of the different groups that are influencing the growers. How do we work together to solve this problem rather than try to tackle it individually? I think that we're far more successful if we work together. So I agree with you 1,000%. I don't know how you go about doing it except for making opportunities to sit down in a room and talk to begin with. Yes, Ken.
Ken Smith with Kemanova. Jill, thanks for your comments, and obviously you've been there and done that education role, and it shows. But one of the things, I guess, that from WSSA and what can we do, one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that in my former role as Extension in Arkansas, we worked with NRCS to provide some incentive programs for resistance weed management. We trained over 100 technical service providers in that state to write herbicide resistance management plans. Now, unfortunately, NRCS has not prioritized or has not had the funding to fund that at a level that it should be funded. I think that WSSA can help to push that along. And let me say that in our training program for the technical service providers, we relied very heavily on the training modules that WSSA already has in place. Very valuable. So those things are happening and things that we can do. I probably would question how valuable it is for me, you, or whoever to be a advisor, certified advisor. I don't know if that's going to carry a lot of weight with our farmers. Farmers are going to follow the person with the credibility. And it's imperative that we make our decisions, we make our recommendation on good science-based information, and I think that the farmers will follow that lead and will adopt these practices as we move along. Thank you, though, for your comment.
Thank you.
Liz.
Another question that's come in on the webcast from Nathan Fields with NCGA. How does the Take Action program started by the United Soybean Board play a role in the tools available? NCGA and other commodity groups have shown support for the program. Where is WSSA on this?
Since I am currently not on the board, I cannot speak for WSSA. So that, number one, I will not do that. I think the Take Action program is very good, but it is a soybean program, and I think that we need to think more broadly than that. Again, we're moving into Jill's personal opinion here. I think that we need a broader perspective so that we can be inclusive for all commodities, because herbicide resistance, as was discussed earlier today, that it's not commodity specific, that the weeds invade from one commodity to the next in rotations. And so we really need to think about this more broadly than a single commodity. And so I think that there's a lot of good things out there, but I think that we also need to think about how we can broaden the perspective to include all of the ecosystems, all of the country in the discussions. And I think that the responses that we got from the first survey question that we had, that not only do we need to have a independent branded program, but we also need to look at these other programs and perhaps consider a WSSA seal of approval or whatever for those maybe two approaches that we can take.
Okay,
Yes,
one more.
comment.
Karen Fouch with the United Soybean Board, and I just wanted to respond that while Take Action was originally developed by the United Soybean Board, it really is an industry-wide initiative, and corn growers are funding the program. We have some support from sorghum, wheat, cotton. We've been working with the major ag chemical companies and land-grant university weed scientists across the country. So it's our desire that Take Action could work closely with you as the WSSA in terms of developing a grower outreach program. I think we've done a lot of research to get to where we are. We've made some strides, and I hope that we can sit down and talk and work together as we move forward.
I think that's exactly what we need to do, yes.
Okay, thank you, Jill. We've got a 28-minute break coming up. I just cut it from 30 minutes to 28. But that still means be back in your seats at 3:37. How about that?
Okay, so how do you turn this off?